All right, guys, what's going on? Grab a pen and jot this down. This afternoon, I went to check out the Sierra vs. Acquired podcast conversation in New York City at the Jazz at Lincoln Center in Columbus Circle. Beautiful event. Obviously, if you've never listened to the Acquired podcast, it is definitely the top notch business podcast. They do the deepest dives. It is like 3 to 4 hour long podcast episodes. They have a stronghold on, the venture capital, CEO, executive, investment industry, engineers, developers. They have a stronghold on a lot of people that love to do case studies, deep dives. I think it's an interesting model. They've definitely, have figured out how to do these long form podcasts. I think they only do 8 per year now, and they're fantastic. If you need to learn about Ferrari, Vanguard, Google, pick the company, LVMH. It doesn't matter what it is. Historical brands. They've done a really good deep dive. I would recommend looking at I think it was their 10-year anniversary that they did with Michael Lewis, who's the guy who wrote The Big Short. Right, The Big Short, Liar's Poker, all those like famous Wall Street, high finance, high like thriller style books that are based on real life. Moneyball. They do that interview does a good synopsis of the journey of Acquired. And the reason I mentioned this is because obviously a lot of people like to listen to podcasts, but if you only listen to one, maybe over the week, over the month, that's the one you want to listen to, because they talk about their journey. It's a business model, so it's done very well, very, very, very successful. The sponsorships are in the multi-millions. And what's interesting is they figured out at the moments that they have to pivot, they figured out the moments that, they have to cut on, number of episodes. They have to figure out their branding or the level of depth they're going to do in specific episodes. I think there was one or two either on Lockheed Martin, on the defense industry, that were really interesting. That they really picked out these moments in time. And I think it was Google, maybe Microsoft with Steve Ballmer, where they interviewed people that were the number 2, number 3 in product launches, or special moments in the history of technology, or in business, or in IPOs that were really meaningful in terms of the economy, not just in terms of investing, because investing is important, because when you have a pivotal moment in a launch of a product, you experience a rate of change. Now that's really hard to experience the moment before it happens, but when it happens, it moves from 10% to 45%, and that rate of change is literally a 4.5x. That's the moment. That inflection point is what you have to figure out. Will the company go from 10% to 45%, return on equity? And companies like Microsoft and Google have experienced this multiple times. So today, they had this beautiful interview with Brett Taylor. Now, Brett Taylor is well known in the technology industry for a couple things. I almost forget because his resume is, one, he's only been probably working for 25 years, but his resume is so stacked that it's hard to believe that someone so young has been able to. He's the guy who refactored and relaunched Google Maps for what we know it is today. I think he refactored the entire code base because it was so inefficient before. He worked closely on Google Search, so he was a very strong product guy. I read that he had launched 2 different startups. One he sold to Salesforce. The other one he sold to Meta, Facebook, when it was Facebook. For a brief moment in time, I think he was the CTO of Facebook, which was meaningful. I will get back to a leadership point that he mentioned in that moment that was pretty cool for me. He was well known. I think he had a relatively good tenure as being the co-CEO of Salesforce. As much as people hate the CRM, it's really important for the ecosystem, because if you speak to any sales team, anyone on the floor, out in the field, Salesforce CRM is just mission critical. It has a lot of security. It's very robust. It's very it has tremendous amount. It may not be perfect. It may be very expensive, but there are reasons why it is. So he led that initiative. Obviously, he was a part of the debacle of the OpenAI when Sam Altman was pushed. He was called in and had become the chairman of the board. I believe that's his role. of OpenAI, which is at the cutting edge of AI. Obviously, they deployed the first chatbot, so it was very successful. First mover's advantage. He's very strong as the head over there, and he's running a company called Sierra that does customer service AI, some variation of voice agent AI, call center, etc. I think it's like a $4 or $5 billion business. I think it's at a multi 9 figure run rate, and I think he said he has 40% of the Fortune 50 or something like that, or that was ChatGPT. But obviously he's got a relationship with ChatGPT, so he's probably using the API, enterprise API, and other things. But he's like deep understanding. He's talking about the conversation was pretty much what you would expect because I think he's quite public in terms of he talks about it when he can, but it's relatively known. Like voice AI, call centers, customer service, even sales calls are capable to be done by voice AI. I use voice AI in 4 different variations throughout the day, and I don't even use it for customer service because I'm not in that type of business. But banks, insurance companies, health providers, all these credit cards, etc., they have significant demand. And the best example he used was Google. The average customer that is a Google customer is only producing about $10 in revenue per month. So it's very, very low, but they have tremendous amount of customers, right? In the multiple billions. The average is $10 a month. So if a customer calls Google, it's almost impossible to get a hold of customer service. Like you have a better chance of calling the executive team, Sundar and everybody else. And there's a problem because Google doesn't have the capacity. Like you cannot handle the bandwidth of let's say 300 million out of your 2 billion customers calling about I have a search problem, I have an ad problem, I can't find this on YouTube, I can't do this on Google Workspace, my Gemini product doesn't work, my phone is broken, my browser doesn't do this. That's unbelievable because one phone call he said would just be immediate loss, and you'll get thousands of phone calls like every minute. But he said with AI now it's capable, like you're able to educate, train, and like deploy these agents, and they are able to provide very, very high quality answers, high satisfaction to the customer, and then all of a sudden your cost per call goes from like $100 to $10 to $1 to 1 penny and below. And I was like, yeah, there are problems. Like you have to invest X amount of dollars. It might be 50 million, it might be $100 million, and then you have to maintain the customer service or the call center database engine. But you have to continuously keep doing this. So it's like you can get the cost down. So obviously he's in a really good business to get the cost down. So it's a miracle. What was interesting that the 2 takeaways I got from that were number one was the leadership problem he learned. Actually, let me go into the Google search first. So Google search was interesting because he actually acknowledged that Google, in the moment when Microsoft released Bing search, it was the first high quality search engine that was competitive to Microsoft. So it was a very good product, which you could expect because Microsoft has strong enterprise and strong consumer, as particularly in the early 2000s. Probably they were in that cusp, so they had a strong enterprise presence in terms of they could build really good systems, operating systems. So they built a good product. But what he mentioned was they only, because they were a software company that like had this like CD like shelf life architecture, they only updated the search engine like once a month or whenever they were like deploying Microsoft Office or Microsoft Windows. That would be their product cycle. So they would just be like, we launched it today. It's really good. It's 80% of Google search. And then like 30 days later, they would update new features. But he said Google would release updates several times per day. So by day 30, they would have 4, like 80, 90, 100, 200 like updates. And then in 6 months, they would be thousands of cycles ahead of Microsoft, even though Microsoft actually had a great product. But because they weren't updating it and getting customer feedback quick enough, they actually just fell behind naturally. So it was interesting because he used that example in terms of AI in the sense that everybody's on the cutting edge of these AI models today, but the people that aren't investing in maintenance or producing the best in class product, or just continuously upgrading their current product at a very high velocity, high volume, they are simply falling behind. And I was like, yeah, I see that. I mean, I see that myself, because if I'm not using these products, not building these products, testing these products, selling these products, investing, whatever, cycle over and over again, I'm falling behind. And it always feels like that. And I might be ahead of some people, but certainly feels like I'm behind a couple other people. And I just, whatever, playing this balancing act, as is everybody else. So I thought that was a really cool lesson, because he did acknowledge that Microsoft has a very good product. Obviously, they still have quite a bit of market share. The second thing he mentioned was at his leadership role at Meta, and he worked or reported to Sheryl Sandberg, and he acknowledged that she had a meeting with them, basically a performance review meeting, and instead of having the typical, you know, every 6 months, every 3 months, every once a year, I would go through X, Y, and Z with you, and we would go over these bullet points. She had like 3 pages of bullet points, and they were extremely hard bullet points, meaning you did this wrong, this is how the team is lacking. You did this wrong, this is where we're suffering. You did this wrong, you were very weak in this area. And he said it hit him hard. Like, he went through the stages of grief, anger, whatever, and then resentment, and then blah, blah, blah. And then he came back to it. He's like, this is a problem. I am the problem. And I was like, this is good. Because he realized, I don't know if it was Cheryl or someone else on the team at Meta, or a mentor, maybe it was mentor. He mentioned that the typical problem for a leader, particularly when they get pushed into a leadership position, is that they think their job is to uh, the their employees and their product and their entire staff is supposed to be a reflection of them. And the reality is you are supposed to take in what the product and consumer and customer and operations of the business is doing. So you're supposed to be inwards as opposed to outwards. And the problem is, if you're facing outwards, you are attempting to constantly push your ego against the market. But the problem that creates is that you will push your strengths and you will never acknowledge your weaknesses. So I thought that was interesting, because I've never heard of this before, and it's a really good point. The point is that if you're very strong in product, you will push towards, and if you're very strong in consumer, you will push towards product and consumer, and then you will immediately walk away from the other problems. Like, I'm not strong in management, managing the operations team. I'm not strong in having employee feedback. I'm not strong in customer service or working with other teams or doing sales meetings. So I'm just not going to do it, because that's not the reflection of my personality or my leadership style. And his mentor said, no, you have to do the job that's necessary to get the job done, or where it needs to be next. So if that job requires you to have 14 sales meetings a week, or you need to be on the call with every single customer in the next 6 months, or you need to interview this person who's going to maybe threaten your job because they're better at something that you are not good at, or you need to work on customer service or operations, or these points of the product that aren't exciting, or the pivot to a new adjacent product line. Those are the areas that actually a leader is needed the most. And those are the areas where you are actually the most vulnerable. So you will actually grow. So you will grow into those weaknesses. And then they'll become not your strength, but they'll become parts of your trait, that you can handle the situation that is required of the job. And it's not the other way around, that you're saying that, no, I don't do this, so I'm not going to do it. And I was like, that's actually very true. Obviously, there's probably some ego or definition related to ego, but I thought that was super interesting to look inwards and say, I'm just weak in these spots. Because I thought about it right away, and I said, yeah, I'm probably weak in like 5-6 areas. But where I'm probably most weak is, I'm not a Fortune 500 CEO. So if I took the schedule or the responsibilities of a Fortune 500 CEO and said, you have to hire a COO that's making $2 million in salary, and the responsibilities is 2,000 employees, and the CTO is supposed to go through this, and the budget is supposed to be 50 million for this. And I think if anybody was put in that position, they'd be like, they would fall into the position and say, I would have to take in these responsibilities because I want to be a leader. I want to be a great leader. I want to be the best leader. And I thought that was super interesting, because that is the way to say I can fall into any position and this will be a valuable trait, and I will learn these traits to become the leader that is necessary to run a large organization. And I thought that was a great learning point. And I tip my hat off to Brett and Dan and Ben for running Acquired. The conversation was excellent. I don't know if it's going to be available online, but I definitely want to share what I learned from it because I thought it was interesting to share those two specific traits that Brett talked about. And obviously, the cutting edge of AI is always good to hear from the guy who's sitting at the literally in the arena and learning about stuff in real time. So check it out if you get a chance and test one of those traits if you can as well.